Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian, and on today's show, I'm going to dive into a phrase that has really been serving me well during a season of hard and a season of struggle. And I pray that this phrase will also be a blessing to you. And no, it is actually not hard. It's not the same thing as bad, believe it or not. But I think it will be impactful nonetheless, or at least I know it is for me. Before we dive in, I want to talk about our podcast sponsors. Right now we have Voetberg Music Academy, and you know that they are an affordable online way to get your children to learn music and to love learning music, to participate in their ability to earn online badges and even badges that are mailed to their door, which kids absolutely love getting mail. And you can learn 5 different instruments, including guitar, ukulele, mandolin, violin, and piano. And you can also participate in their September Ribbon Festival as a way of showcasing your improvement and doing that with a community, which is so motivating for kids. You won't have to constantly be telling them to keep practicing, and that is such a gift to parents. Another gift to parents is saving money. Your fees for your enrollment in Voetberg Music Academy can be shared between siblings and can be as low as $30 a month with my code MSForMama20 for 20% off each month that you're enrolled. I also want to talk about my sponsor, Christian Book. ChristianBook.com is your one-stop shop for all things Christian books, Christian gifts, and especially for me, I love that they have all things homeschool, that I can find any of my favorite curricula there, whether it's BJU Press or Saxon or Apologia or Story of the World, all of which our family has used. And I know that you will be able to find wonderful resources there as you work with their specialized personnel that can help answer your questions about homeschooling. Remember, if you have questions about homeschooling or if you need a gift from a Christian bookstore or just a great book, they sell my books there. You can check them out at christianbook.com. Okay, so let's talk about this phrase that I want to share with you. And it is 3 words, and it may remind you of a really popular sports brand, but that's not actually what I was thinking of when it came to me. And the phrase is, you just do. And I'm going to unpack it for us. So if you're like, okay, what does that have to do with anything? How is this helpful? That did not blow my mind, Abby. Thanks so much, but no thanks. I want to rewind and talk to you about the season that our family has been in for a little while. When I did my update after our summer break, I talked about the fact that we have experienced a miscarriage this summer. And I want to acknowledge that my body has really struggled to complete that process. And I know that this is going to be a little bit of a journey for me to figure out what's going on with my hormones, to figure out what it's like to be a perimenopausal woman, which is such a funny thing to say because I don't feel like someone that should even be throwing the word menopause around. But perimenopausal means that it's, happening, beginning to happen, all of that stuff where your hormones are changing and things aren't working like they used to. And so I have my midwife talking to me about getting blood work and all of this stuff. And that's just not particularly fun. It's not something I enjoy doing. I don't think anyone enjoys going and getting their arm stuck with a needle and then waiting for results. But it is something that I have to do, because I don't want to be experiencing the effects of this miscarriage forever. And I don't want to be experiencing the effects of my hormones being out of whack, which is what's causing some of these miscarriage symptoms. And then on top of that, we have had a season of sickness like our family rarely has. A lot of the people in our area have had something similar. And it's just summer cold or something else. I don't even know. But we are not what you would picture for a large family when they get sick, because I get questions constantly from readers who say things like, I can't imagine having a large family because you guys, if you get something, which, there's always something going around, always something you catch. You can't always just stay home and avoid it all, obviously. Surely when one of you gets it, it goes through the whole ranks. And because we are a family that tends to treat things with simple and effective home remedies, we actually don't find that to be the case for us. Typically, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of us will get mildly ill from a stomach bug or a virus with a fever that's going around or something or other, but we really hadn't for months upon end. In fact, dun dun dun, Sean had said, we haven't gotten sick in forever. I mean, like at all, any kind of sickness. Nobody's had a sniffle or a sneeze or thrown up or anything. And of course, that's not the kind of thing you say out loud. And I say that jokingly because I don't believe in quote unquote tempting fate or jinxing yourself. I'm not superstitious, any of those things, but it is kind of funny how often we voice those things and then our brains are so acutely aware when the very thing we said that hadn't happened in a while suddenly happens. Coincidence or not, because I don't believe in coincidences either. It definitely does bring it to mind once we've kind of uttered those fateful words. And so he did. He said, we haven't been sick in like 9 months. And sure enough, back in July, we went to our church's VBS and everybody was getting something. And so we started out with some dry coughs and hacking and wasn't a big deal. And then we've just had one thing after another. Nothing severe, nothing life-threatening, nothing life-changing, but just niggling. And so we've been doing all of our things and getting gradually and slowly better. But it seems like as soon as one kid gets better, something else hits somebody else. And again, this kind of domino effect that everybody assumes is always happening in a large family is not typical for us. So it has been a season of perseverance. I keep telling Sean that I would like for my children's coughs to end for their sake first, but I also selfishly would love to get a break from listening to people cough, if that makes sense. And again, they're fine. They're just still fighting kind of those lingering effects. So that has been a season for several weeks where it's been more acute. And then on top of that, we got stomach bugs last weekend. Now, again, did it travel through all of us? No. Was it horrendous and lasted for 5 days and everybody needed fluids, from IVs or anything like that? No, it was relatively mild, but it did feel a little bit like the last straw in a season that has been a bit of a bummer. And then we had a bit of a last straw. So let me rewind again and tell you this story that starts out fun and I don't know how it ends yet. So I'm going to leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger because I doubt I will know the answer by the time this podcast posts either. So my twin girls have been making handmade dolls for about 3 or 4 months. They love to create, they love to craft, they love to bake. They are just creators by nature. And they do it in each one does it in her own unique way, but at the same time, they both share that passion. So they do it together well, whether it's baking or cooking or painting, or in this case, my mom and I had taught them the basics of sewing years ago, and they had worked on a pattern with me for a little doll that I had made, very simple little doll that I had made for people for Christmas for a long time ago, probably 8 years ago. So they're Abby and Nella will be turning 12 in a couple of weeks. And so I made those dolls 8 years ago and had the pattern, but of course my girls weren't sewing when they were 3 or 4. And so I still had the pattern and they wanted to try it. So we worked on it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and they retained those skills and started practicing them. And they started making these adorable dolls where they freehand them and they just create whimsical designs, whether it's a fox with a flower crown and a little tartan skirt and a cute blouse, or Nola has made a pair of foxes that are dressed as a bride and groom, or elephants or unicorns, or they have incredible imaginations. And I know I'm bragging on my own kids, but I have been genuinely blown away by their ability to just say, I want to make a pig and create an outfit for him. And I'm like, what pictures are you looking at? They're like, we don't look at pictures, which I find amazing because I am somewhat crafty. Not anymore. I don't have time. Somewhat artistic, iffy, but I have to be looking at something to be able to draw it or whatever. And they just have it in their brains, which I find incredibly cool. So they made these dolls and they asked if I could post them to my stories. And I did, not knowing what would happen. And they sold out immediately. And so the girls were like, we'll make some more. So they have been industriously sewing and hand embroidering these dolls, making bespoke little outfits for them that are so cute for months and saving their money. And they came to us and said, we've been saving our money for a puppy. We would like you to consider this. And they're very responsible and sweet girls. And I knew that they would take good care of a little dog. And so Sean and I prayed about it and talked about it and decided that, yes, that's something that we could do. And so I reached out to my readers on Instagram, and the Lord brought along just the right person who had the exact dog that my girls wanted, a little Cavapoo puppy. Had one ready to go pretty much within a couple of weeks. Because, when you're 11 and you saved up your money for months, waiting another 2 months for a dog to be ready to go or to be born and then ready to go feels like torture, right? And so was ready to go, and that person flew the dog down to us from Pennsylvania, and the girls got a great deal. She was like, I really want your family to have this dog. So she gave us a great bargain, and then we paid for her plane ticket and the little dog's plane ticket, and it was still a good deal compared to the prices around here that we were getting for this Cavapoo breed. We named her Winnie the Cavapoo. She is adorable, just a little, we walk around singing the Winnie the Pooh song all the time, except we make it Winnie the Cavapoo, chubby little puppy all covered in fluff. And so if you're familiar with that vintage theme song from Winnie the Pooh, you'll know exactly the tune that goes with that. And so it's just been such a joy to have her. We went to Dallas and picked her up, made it a special girls trip. Well, the Twinbies were with us, but Twinbies and Twinsies went with me to Dallas to meet the reader that flew her to Texas for us. So just a whole special experience. They could not be more thrilled. She could not be a more perfect addition to our family. Happy ending, right? Well, Sunday night, Sean and I take, maybe not nightly showers, but most nights of the week, we end by taking a shower and talking about the day. And everybody always acts super scandalized. I'm like, believe it or not, we're married. This is not weird for us, but it's just kind of our ritual of how to recap the day. And the kids know this, and they were downstairs finishing up their cleanup after dinner. And so before we could even get undressed to get into the shower, which I'm so grateful for that part, that they didn't burst in the door with us half naked. That would have been weird. Before we can even get undressed, there are kids pounding on the door screaming. And it's the kind of screaming that makes the blood run like ice water in your veins, that no mom ever wants to hear, because my oldest daughter, Della, is screaming, Mama, please help. She's not breathing. And of course, I've had some kids that have been coughing, and I'm terrified that all of a sudden these mild coughs that we've had have taken a turn for the worse and are now, one of my children is not breathing. And so I throw the door open and look around for the child. And instead, she thrusts our sweet little dog, Winnie, into my arms, who very much so is not breathing, who is gagging and cannot draw breath and is going stiff and is not doing well at all. And so we had a very traumatic and dramatic and just kind of all the things night. My girls are crying. Turns out that Della had stepped backwards without realizing that Winnie was there, had stepped on her, and it had really hurt her. And we still don't know exactly whether she had something in her mouth at the time and started choking on it, or if she went into cardiac arrest. But she essentially was dying in front of our eyes after having her for like a week and a day, which I told the story on Instagram. And I said that the crazy thing is that we have another dog named Ruby, who is a 6-year-old beagle. And we got her when she was 8 weeks old. And within a week and a couple of days, she was trying to die on us. This is 6 years ago, because she had some sort of sickness that she came to us with that we didn't realize that started worsening. So we took her to the vet. The vet couldn't do anything for her. We took her to a different vet who couldn't seem to do anything for her. This is on a weekend. So of course it's very expensive because nobody wants to be there working on the weekend. And he finally thought, kind of a last minute thing, that he was a last ditch effort. Maybe it's this. And that helped her and saved her. And she survived and strengthened, and she's doing great. So we've already kind of done this once, but at least it wasn't our children's animal that they had saved up and bought for themselves and were extremely attached to. And so this little dog is just expiring in my arms, and Sean takes her from me and he starts performing CPR on her when it looks like she is just gone. And I am frantically calling vets. Of course it's 9:30 at night instead of during the day when vets are open. And so I call our normal vet and I get an emergency number, And I call the emergency number and they tell us to bring her in. And it is a $1,200 upfront deposit. I mean, you can tell going in how this is going to go. They have got you right where they want you. And if they're going to help you, it's going to cost you dearly. So much for the good deal we got, right? And so we race her to the vet. I'm going the speed limit, I promise. But Sean is like holding her, and she finally stabilized enough. She came back to consciousness, stabilized enough that she could breathe, but in a very labored way, and obviously in pain and struggling. So we get her there, and we stay till 1 a.m, and they put her on oxygen. And long story short, although not very short, because I've already been telling this for a little while, we ended up leaving her there for the night because she wasn't in stable enough condition to bring home. And then we transferred her to a day vet so that it wasn't as astronomically as expensive as it was going to end up being if she had stayed at the emergency vet. And so here we are with her at a vet after we only got to have her and enjoy her for 8 or 9 days. So we still don't know the outcome because there appear to be things in her stomach that we don't know where they came from. Maybe she had something in her mouth when she got stepped on. We don't know. Anyway, so my twin girls are obviously on pins and needles, heartbroken that their little dog might die. And I am too, honestly, for their sake, and less so for mine because, I don't get to feel as much grief when I'm not as invested, but she's a very sweet little dog. So it kind of feels like one thing after another. And going back, if you're wondering why I'm telling you all these stories after telling you what the phrase was, I want to say that I get a lot of questions, especially on What Do You Want to Know Wednesday, but I get these in my DMs and in my email that go a little something like this. And I'll connect the anecdotes that I just told you about the season of life that we're in with the phrase and with these questions. I promise I'm going to put them all together. The questions go like this. How do I have any compassion for my husband and his struggles when I am sleep deprived and have my own struggles? How do I choose to forgive someone who has wronged me and they are they're repentant, but my emotions aren't there? How do I get up each day and serve my family when I have a newborn that has not slept well the night before? How do I learn how to care for a home when I was not taught how to do this by my own mother? Where do I even start, or how do I even start to research more holistic ways of eating or living, or healthier ways of doing things? And guys, I don't want to sound at all uncompassionate or inconsiderate. And so that's not my heart in this. But I do believe that a lot of those questions come from a place of frustration and overwhelm. I think most of them come from a place of frustration and overwhelm at the very least. But they also come from a place, often it seems, based on my interactions when I respond, if I'm able to respond, from a place of possibly knowing what the answer is and not liking it very much. So the answer, to some extent, because obviously I cannot tell you how to drum up emotions to forgive your friend. I don't know exactly the best way to interact with your husband when he's struggling, when you're also struggling, because I don't know your personality. I don't know your husband's personality. I don't know the strength of your relationship, the extenuating circumstances that are making life difficult for both of you. But I do know this. Philippians 4:19, this is the ESV version, says, "And my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus." I know you've probably heard that verse before, but I think it's really applicable here because I can't necessarily break down the answer for you. I can't necessarily customize a prescription. Obviously, I don't just mean I can't. You're like, of course you can't, Abby. You're just one woman. I mean, there's not necessarily anyone out there who could answer these questions in great detail and give you a step-by-step plan they might give you one and they might charge you $59.99 a month for it, but there's no guarantee that it will be the right plan specifically for you in your exact circumstances. But I can point you to the God of the universe who is able to supply all of your needs according to the riches that we have in Christ Jesus if we follow him. And so when the phrase "you just do" pops into my head, it's not just a bootstrapping kind of thing. It's not just a pushback that's like, listen, stop complaining and get on with it. But there is something that I need to remind myself of in those three words often. So when I go to bed at 2 a.m. after a really exhausting night, emotionally, physically, all the things, my nerves are shot. And I know that I have to get up at 7 at the absolute latest to get breakfast ready and go teach a class and then proceed on with my day with homeschooling. And I get awakened at 5 a.m. by the vet saying, here's the update, make these decisions. And it takes me a while to fall back asleep. So very fragmented sleep. That's just one night. Believe me, I've done many, many, many nights of not very much sleep, very fragmented sleep with feeding twins and all of that stuff. But I recognize this is just one particular night. But knowing that I'm going to be tired the next day, knowing that I still need to homeschool, knowing that I have an appointment at the DMV I have to go to, knowing that I still need to prep dinner, that I need to record a podcast, which I'm doing now, that I have emails to answer, that I need to read aloud to my children, that I have laundry to do. And I could ask myself, how in the world can you be expected to do these things given your evening the night, what happened the night before? How are you going to tackle this and have any energy to do it? And to some extent, the answer is you just do. You're just going to, because you have to. And whereas drumming up emotion, especially if we don't feel it, isn't so much of a "you just do." We a lot of times can't force that to appear. There are many other things that we can choose to do. So, for example, I know I've said that I can't give prescriptive advice to every single situation, but to the mom that says, my husband is in a season of struggle, but I'm depleted and tired too. And how do I serve him and how do I recognize him? And, or how could I possibly? And to some extent, a "you just do" answer could be when you're making yourself and your baby some breakfast. And part of you says, I don't want to make someone else breakfast. I don't feel like doing that. I've done enough. I haven't gotten enough sleep and I've done enough. I'm at my max. That you just crack 2 more eggs and you just butter another piece of toast. And then you can put it on a plate and hand it to him. And you put a smile on your face because you know that this is exactly the kind of thing that you would want done for you. And some people out there have their hackles up and they're like, oh, servitude, or that's just one example, guys. And it's a very practical way of saying, instead of sitting in, I don't know how to serve this person, you just serve them. Or I don't know how to forgive this person. You just accept their eye contact and nod and say good morning, even when you don't know what to do next. Or in my case, with this season that I'm in, and having to finish a book deadline, and saying, there is a part of me that knows this strategy so well because the Lord has had to walk me through this over and over again, where you find yourself asking, how could I possibly, how do I? And the Holy Spirit nudges you and says, you just do. You take the next step, even when it seems like it won't make a difference. Because that's my encouragement to you. And that's why this is not like this hardcore pep talk of just dust your hands off and get up and keep marching, girl. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there is actually a grace in allowing ourselves to acknowledge that it's okay for our answer to how do I to be simply take the next step. You just do the thing that you're required to do next. and my God will supply all your needs, and his grace will be sufficient for you, and his power will be made perfect in your weakness. Those are not platitudes, those are scriptural principles. So if you find yourself in a situation where maybe you feel a little bit stuck and you feel a little bit like you don't know what to do next, you feel a little bit like, how could I, or how do I? And you're looking for some sort of motivation. And maybe, just maybe, you keep having this niggling feeling that there's something you're supposed to do. I talk about this example in Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad, my second book, where I'm talking about the chapter on mom friendships. And I talk about this really hard friendship that just fell apart. And a couple of years went by, and I had really struggled with anxiety and with knowing how to proceed with that relationship. The relationship wasn't still intact, but knowing how to interact if I were to run into this person, wanting to do so graciously, but feeling really anxious over it. And then the Lord asked me to have lunch with this person. And I found myself saying, like, how do I do that, Lord? How do I, what does that practically look like? And the answer was, you just send her a text. You ask her the question, would you like to have lunch? And you don't get to be the one that decides that she'll say no. You don't get to be the one that decides how she'll respond. You just do what I've asked you to do. And in response, she said yes, and it was a good lunch, and it wasn't any earth-shattering closure or anything like that, but it was an act of obedience that while I bristled at it and thought, Lord, there are so many things that could go wrong with this. This is really complicated. In the end, really what it unraveled to in its simplest form was a request from the Lord to trust him with a simple step of obedience and let him take care of the rest. And so if you're wondering how you proceed in a really hard situation, and there is at least one step that you feel prompted to make, convicted to make, may I encourage you that how you do it is you just do it. You do the next thing. Elizabeth Elliot talks about this, and I love her encouragement that's so practical. She talks about how just foggy her brain was and how much it was all encompassing to think about the future when she is a young widow and this mother of her daughter without their father and husband there to help, and in a foreign country. And she just learned that instead of trying to zoom out and say, how is this going to work? What is the outcome? Lord, give me the plan, give me all the steps. It was just take the next step. You just do the next thing. So I wanted to share that with you today because that is something that is helping me right now in the season that I currently find myself. And I often find that I'm not alone. You've probably found this to be true as well. No temptation has seized us except what is common to man. And I think one way we can interpret that verse is that no conflict, no struggle, no challenge, like there's nothing new under the sun. So whether it's sickness or miscarriage or lost relationships or marital kind of struggle or a beloved pet that might die still, we don't necessarily know the outcome, but we often know more about the will of God for us in Christ Jesus than we let on. We are so paralyzed by wanting to have everything neatly kind of boop, 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 fall into place and to see the end result that we ignore that thing in front of us that's asking us to just do the next right thing. And so, and I say that, and really it's just the next thing. Load the dishwasher, kiss your children and give them hugs in the morning, show up to that thing that you're supposed to show up to on time. Just kind of really basic things that may not even feel like right or wrong, but they are there in front of you and they need doing. So if that's the season that you're in as well, or any of this resonates with you, I want to encourage you that you're not walking alone, not just because I'm saying I understand, but primarily because the Lord is walking in it with you. And the Bible promises us that he has overcome our struggles and that we can be of good cheer in that, and that he never leaves us or forsakes us. Whew. So if you think of it, if you hear this on the day that it releases, I would love it if you would be willing to pray for our little dog, Winnie, the Cavapoo, and for healing and for recovery for her. And I just want you to know that even if I don't know your exact circumstances, even if I haven't gotten a DM or an email from you, I am stopping after this podcast is done to pray for people out there like you, maybe today, who are a little uncertain of next steps, or maybe they have this niggling feeling that they're supposed to take a really basic next step and it just doesn't sound very fun. They just kind of don't want to. And I've been there too, and I'm there now in many ways. And I just want to encourage you that we know for a fact that the will of God for us in Christ Jesus is to give thanks in all circumstances, to rejoice in all things, and to pray without ceasing. And so if you don't know what else to do, you can always just do those things. And the Lord will be faithful to give you wisdom as you seek it from him to do the next thing. If you enjoy the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends, or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.